I just wanted to create this kind of every girl that girls could relate to and show her life. I think we were incredibly successful in doing that.
Hi, everyone. It's Kara Goldin from The Kara Goldin Show, and I'm super, super excited to have my next guest here. This is Tina Wells. And Tina, for those of you who do not know her, she is an entrepreneur, business strategist, and best-selling author multiple times. We're going to get into many of her books, but her most recent book, The Zee Files, is a spin-off series of her best-selling tween fiction series called Mackenzie Blue. And we are so excited to have Tina here to share a little bit more about it. But again, she's just a little bit more on Tina. She's a business strategist, advisor, author, and the founder of Relevant Media. And Tina has been recognized by Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business, Essence's 40 Under 40, and so much more. And for over 2 decades, she led Buzz Marketing Group, an agency she founded at age, wait a minute, Tina, 16 years old, you founded an agency? I love it. We got to talk more about that. With clients like Dell, the Oprah Winfrey Show, Apple, J&J, just to name a few. So it's so great. We're going to get into some of her other books and her marketing handbook, which is gold. Everybody should definitely pick up a copy of this for sure. So many more. Board positions have included Think's, the United Nations Foundation's Global Entrepreneurs Council. That is a mouthful. Wow. The Franklin Institute and Young Entrepreneurs Council. She has served as the academic director for Wharton's Leadership in the Business World program at the University of Pennsylvania and is a member of the 2017 class of Henry Crown Fellows, with the Aspen Global Leaderships Network at the Aspen Institute, and a total badass this could go on and on. So let's dive right in. Welcome. Where are you coming from today, Tina?
Thank you, Kara. I'm coming to you from Brazil. I know. Not at all the place I ever thought I would say I'm coming to anyone from. So I am just as shocked too these days.
So had you been there before?
Only once before. I was here for a Dell Women's Conference maybe 5 years ago. I was in Rio. And so as many of us had to make really quick decisions in 2020, and this was a quick decision, and I'm really grateful it's worked out, but it was definitely not at all on my vision board, my life plan, my anything plan. So
I love it. I was supposed to be at that conference 5 years ago. I wanted to go to Rio. I've never been there, and I've always wanted to go to Brazil. And I mentioned to you, I'm taking this course right now that the professor was actually mentioning how Brazil, obviously huge country and doing amazing, great things, but he's got it on his radar of countries that are really not sort of on the radar as much as they should be in terms of paying attention to what they're doing. So it made me even more interested in kind of going back there and visiting. So really excited to hear more about that as well. So you started Buzz Marketing Group at age 16. Let's just jump in. What in the world were you doing at 16? So you're in high school.
Yeah. And let me just be very honest. At 16, really at 15, my dream in life was to be a fashion editor. I am a child of the 80s, a teenager of the 90s. So I was watching Saved by the Bell. I wanted to be Lisa Turtle. That was my dream in life. I didn't even know what marketing was. And so I got a job based on an ad I saw in 17 magazine, as a product review editor for this newspaper called the New Girl Times. And that's how I got really into market research, because I would review products. I would send my reviews, and the companies would always say, if I send you more stuff, will you keep telling me what you think? And that became me giving surveys to friends. And I didn't really understand what I was doing. It was just a hobby to get free stuff. And that hobby turned into a real business. And my freshman year of college, I had a quote unquote client tell me that she had paid someone $25,000 for market research, and what my friends and I had done it was 10 times better and that I had a business and I needed to figure it out. And I literally went into one of my professor's offices during office hours and said, I've been doing this thing. What should we do? And she kind of stared at me for a while. And then she just said, okay, why don't you take an independent study with me and let's make it a business? And then it became a business. But I mean, for a couple of years, I was just having fun. I wasn't, I have a plan. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know what any of that meant. I knew I wanted to be Lisa Turtle when I grew up. That's all I knew, like at that time.
I love it. Did you see an ad or did you know somebody?
No. So what happened was 17 had put an ad, like the New World Times placed an ad in 17 magazine, like back in the day when they used to have those classifieds in 17. And so it's very embarrassing, but I did not even have a computer at this time. My parents had just gotten me a Brother word processor. And so I typed up a column and my mom faxed it from work for me. And then we got like the call in the home line, the message back in the day when that used to happen. And I called and got the job. And so, I really just thought I want to be a writer, and my degree is in journalism. And so I ended up going to a post-baccalaureate program at Wharton, which is how I ended up getting hired at Wharton. My professor ended up hiring me to run leadership in the business world. But I went to Penn because I was like, I don't really know how to run a business. Like I know how to write and communicate, but I need to learn some business skills. And so I was very fortunate to go through that program at Penn when they still had it, and then to end up, for many years kind of teaching there, which was its own amazing adventure to, over my summers get to go there every day and have just such brilliant students was really amazing.
That's awesome. So you turned your creativity into a business. And so you're in college at that time and you started your own little marketing company. Was that actually Buzz Marketing?
As a teenager, I called it The Buzz. And then when I turned 20, I named it Buzz Marketing Group. But yes, I just always knew buzz was what I don't know, for some reason that word really resonated. And I think when we start to talk about how I come up with books and book concepts, like that naming process is just something that is super important to me. And it always has been. It's probably just one of those like innate skills I have. And I just knew at first it was like the buzz is about information. And then, we trademarked Buzz Spotter and as our version of a trend spotter. And so I just knew that originally we were a research firm and then we really grew with our client needs and grew into an influencer agency. And with every step, it was like, I don't know what this is, but my clients are asking me for it and they say I can do it. So I guess I can, it was never me saying, we're going to focus on influencers, clients coming and saying, you do this really well and I need you to do this for me. And so I really grew up with my business. I always say, Buzz, it really was the place that I grew up.
More than anything. That's amazing. And really solving problems, right? I mean, it sounds like you were sort of tackling these issues that people would come to you with and you had ideas about how to really solve those problems, which is really, that's marketing, right? Yeah. That is ultimately what I share with people all the time, that I think that the biggest lessons that I've learned about marketing is that in order to actually get people to engage, you have to be solving problems, right? You have to identify the problems and sometimes they don't even know what the problem is, but then come up with the solutions, which I think you clearly did. So you're working while you're in college and social media wasn't even what it is today, right? And there weren't multiple platforms of social media. And this is mind blowing the more that I think about it, because it wasn't, this is pre-Twitter, right? This is like, no Instagram. It was just, this is amazing on so many fronts. How did you end up, who was your first client?
Well, okay. So first I have to tell you a funny story. I remember, back in 2000, I'm about to turn 41. So this is definitely clearly going to show my age. Cosmo Girl wrote 2 sentences about what I was doing. And I got 9,000 applications from all over the world from people who wanted to be buzz spotters. This is back when Anne Choquette was one of the founding editors there, and Anne and Michelle Lee, who's now at Allure. Those are the women who kind of birthed my influencer network. And I'm laughing because I remember a moment where their phones were ringing off the hook. They're like, you need to answer these people. They're now stalking our magazine. Like, we don't know what to do. And I remember thinking, girls who want to work with me in Texas. How would I communicate with someone in Texas? But again, this is like year 2000 thinking, and so I'm like, okay, so on our website, do we have to have a function where it's just the idea of what I built so long ago and how long it took to build it. Today, you could build that business in probably a few days. It just, the technology didn't exist. And I'm also laughing because I'm thinking of my girlfriends. I went to a women's college, Hood College, when it was a women's college. And I just think back to our Friday nights, like getting on MySpace and connecting with the guys that we met at the club like a week ago. And so you're right, like the technology that exists now just didn't exist.
And this is dial up too, right? I mean, at times, like you had to probably fight. I tell my kids about this now. I said, the number of fights that we would have with roommates or with, brothers and sisters about don't be on the phone because I am actually on, at that time, AOL chat. And I mean,
yeah, this is no like sexy startup story. I mean, I also am the oldest of 6 children. And so my parents were very smart to get us our own phone line. But I would monopolize it with my dial-up internet and my business that I was doing. And it was like hating me. But then I would always give them stuff. So they were like, all right, Tina, we're going to like roll with this. And then God bless my college roommate. We're still such dear friends. But yeah, like at one point our dorm room was like a shipping center for clients I was working with. And to answer your first question, my first check ever came from Neil Cole. And so Neil Cole is famously the genius behind Bongo and Candies. And I was doing a fashion show and he sponsored it and they like wrote me a check on the spot. And I couldn't believe that people were going to give me money to do something I loved to do, and 20 plus years later, I still don't believe that people give me money to do things that I love to do, and I think that is entrepreneurship when you're really kind of on mission and on brand and living your dream. That's the awesome part of what we get to do, is that every day we're waking up and doing things that we love to do.
Well, you can't see Tina's face, but she's smiling right now, which I always say is the sign of a great entrepreneur, the ones that are, sharing their story and smiling about it because they think exactly as I see you doing about, the stuff that you just can't make up, right? Along the way that happened. And it seemed hard at the time. And I'm sure there were different points along the way. But so you're the founder of Relevant Media and content venture serving entrepreneurs and tweens and, culturists, influencers, et cetera. How can people remain authentic throughout their careers, do you believe?
Well, first, I cheated a little bit, right? Like when you talked about not having social, for me, like my profile was really built through traditional print magazines, and so I was really able to hold on to so much of myself because I'd show up, I'd have the photo, I'd do the interview, and then I'd have my life back, and I would get to go do the work that I love to do. And, when I look at the pressure that social puts on people, even for me, it's like, all right, I have a content plan and all of these things. I couldn't imagine growing into myself as an entrepreneur and also having to do that so publicly at the same time, because there's a maturing process and you're learning and you're growing. And all that growth is not the best thing ever that you want everybody to see, those tough lessons. And so I was fortunate that I could always remain myself and be my true self because I had so much time to cultivate that before I had to kind of be a very public person. And I am an extreme introvert, and it's no wonder I write fiction for middle grade girls because I live in my head so often. And so that public part of what I have to do is still really, it's not scary for me, but it definitely takes me out of my element a lot more than most people would probably think.
What do you think is the biggest change since obviously you started in print, and where do you see social media today? I mean, obviously multimedia content, et cetera, but what is kind of the secret sauce there, do you believe?
I think what I really love now, I think we went through a period where social was, if I can be honest, becoming almost dangerous, to people's mental health. I think now we're living in a time where people are really taking these tools and they're building these massive businesses that are changing people's lives, and what was so hard for me to do back in 1996, to see the tools and how we're democratizing entrepreneurship is awesome. I think we talk so often about women of color not raising venture capital at the same rate as, others. But what we don't talk about is that women of color are starting businesses, at the same rate as, white women. And that is because these tools that exist are really democratizing that process. And so I understand when we have the venture conversation, but we also need to celebrate all of these amazing businesses that people are able to create because they're able to take their phone and turn that phone into their business and into a money-making opportunity and connect with customers really quickly and use these tools to do that.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I totally agree. I think sometimes when we talk about how many blocks are in front of us that we can't do, we realize, I know many people who have built businesses that are $1 million, $2 million businesses, and they didn't raise any money. Yeah. And they're quite happy, right? Yeah. And that's a lot of money, right? And so they just don't, and they don't have a lot of people on the payroll. So this idea that sometimes if you sit there and put in front of yourself, oh, you're never going to be able to go raise money and your company isn't going to be a unicorn, do you care? Right? There's a lot of people who have a lot of headaches from raising money and having these giant companies too. So I think it's something that a lot of people need to think about. So I'm really happy that you said that. What do you think are the key? Obviously you're focused on the tween audience, but I think you're so much more than that, though. You really understand. In order to understand one audience, then you need to understand them all. So let's go into actually your book, Mackenzie Blue, I think that's a good starting point, right? To the next one that you most recently launched. But people from the audience who don't know about Mackenzie Blue, what made you write that, and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So I kind of got started on my tween fiction journey when I was 26 years old. And around that time, I was tapped by a top publisher to do some marketing for a new YA or young adult fiction book that was coming out. And during that process, they kept asking me, don't you want to write something? Don't you want to write something? And I'm like, I don't have time to write. I'm in the middle of, my agency career. I really don't have time. And I was doing some focus groups for a top consumer packaged goods company, and we were studying this new consumer called a tween. And during that focus group, a mom came up to me and she said, you seem to know about these things. My daughter is 10 and she's reading Gossip Girl. What should I do about it? And I thought about that and I'm like, how would I kind of market a good girl to girls? Like, is there a way I could do that? And then I started writing Mackenzie, and then I really started talking to girls in our network, talking to their moms and saying, can I, send this survey to your daughter? Can we talk about issues? And I really kind of packaged this idea, and I'm very honest in saying while I have a degree in journalism and I write, I do not consider myself a traditional, typical writer of fiction. Some might call me a packager, but I am very clear. I look at it the way I look at any other product I'm launching. Product market fit is really important. And so, I use those skills as a marketer to really think about what's motivating my customer. What is she feeling, or what's he feeling? What life stage are they in? And then what are the marketing things I need to add to make it exciting? And so when I started with Mackenzie, she was a typical 12-year-old girl living in Southern California. I very deliberately gave her red hair and blue eyes because I wanted her to feel kind of very unique in this Southern California setting. And she was kind of like Punky Brewster style and doing her own thing, and went to a certified lead school. And, sustainability was incredibly important in my first series, still is in my writing. And I really just created this girl who was not perfect, because I think that the idea that at 12 girls feel the need to be perfect is so crazy, because that's one of the benefits I had growing up in the 90s, right? I wasn't trying to take a photo for social media. I remember the time when me and my friends had to go to CVS or to a pharmacy, print out photos. And so we couldn't even instantly see what we looked like. We lived so in the moment. And so I just wanted to create this kind of every girl that girls could relate to and show her life. And that's, I think we were incredibly successful in doing that.
That's amazing. And then you went on to write the Zee Files, your most recent book. So exciting. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm really, really fortunate to be in partnership with Target and exclusively in West Margin Press for this. And it's a spinoff of Mackenzie Blue. So in Mackenzie Blue, she was 12 years old. In the Zee Files, she's 13. Her family's now moved to London, and she is actually going to a boarding school in the Cotswolds. And so it's super fun to introduce new characters and then to kind of move her and transition her into this new life experience. And, we deal with issues in the series that we didn't deal with in Mackenzie Blue, but, one of her best friend's parents is getting divorced. She starts to develop some issues around learning and attention issues, and then also some issues with anxiety. And so, I think here we're really focused on how do we make it as real as possible. And I think that when I say we, it's my writing partner, my illustrator, the public, like there's a team that really comes together to say, how do we create the very best experience for our reader? And so it was many months of being in that headspace of where are girls at today? What's mattering to them? When you look at the life stage 13, from my perspective, there's now this need for independence, right? And to grow into their own person. So the idea of boarding school was very specific because I wanted to lean into that idea of like, she has pseudo independence, and there was nothing for me at that age when I was 13. I was dying to go to boarding school, right? Like my parents were ruining my life. So any idea that I could escape them for a little bit, I remember watching 15. I don't know if you guys know the show on Nickelodeon with Ryan Reynolds. Like that was my dream to go to that boarding school. So, that was really the inspiration for it.
Did you ever live in London?
No, but I will tell you when I started writing the Zee Files, I was actually writing it as a TV show, and I was in London, and I was spending the weekend at Soho Farmhouse in the Cotswolds. And so when I was there and on my bike, I was like, yes, this is the setting for this fictional school. I think it'll be perfect.
I've always wanted to go there. That's on my bucket list. It looks so amazing. So one day, that's so great. So I have 4 Gen Zers living in my house, and I feel like I'm living it as maybe as much as you have in this process of writing these books too, because I think that there's so many questions I have. In fact, many questions I have is actually, how millennials. I think that millennials today are very different from Gen Xers, which is where I came from, and exactly how happy millennials are, right, with the current sort of status of, there's a great book, if you haven't read it, I'm looking, called Can't Even. Have you read this book?
No.
It's a great book that I actually interviewed her for my podcast recently, and it's about millennials and feeling a little jaded by what they felt was going to be happening, and that you could do it all, and you went to the big city and you went to the right schools, and even if you took on debt, that's cool, like all of this, and then all of a sudden they're take kind of part of the gig economy, and in many cases because they took equity instead and they didn't really understand what that meant. And so, as a Gen Xer, I actually feel this responsibility to, as long as I'm working to try and fix some of these things, but I also feel like there's stuff that needs to get worked out in order for many of those people that are interested in your books, right? Also the Gen Zers, the 4 that I have in my house, because I think there are things that need to get worked out. And it's, so I love that you're focused on this and, looking at this overall, because I really do think it's a challenge that we all need to look a little bit closer at. So in terms of life experiences, what do you think are the key things that you've seen that have really helped you as a writer?
Oh gosh. So I'm pretty sure I didn't get on a plane for the first time until I was 19. And, like first flight ever was to Houston, and my second flight was into Tegucigalpa, in Honduras, where I lived for a few months. And
amazing.
It was an unbelievable experience to have at 19 and really profoundly changed my life. And as you mentioned earlier, through my work, as a member of the Global Entrepreneurs Council with the UN Foundation, I got to travel to Uganda. I got to spend a few days in a refugee camp, actually permanent refugee settlement. I went to an island, a remote island, and I did some consulting with female business owners, and it was probably one of the most humbling experiences of my life, because I really felt like, what in the world do I have to say to these amazing women who are running businesses on a remote island, without electricity? And so I think my writing, like travel, is such a big inspiration. I talked about being inspired, to write the Zee Files on my, trip to London. I used to fondly remember that trip. And so, the last year has been really tough, not being able to just kind of like go and explore and, learn or be integrated into a new culture. And so, that exploration is so important for me as a writer, as I develop characters, as I think about, taking my reader on an adventure. I was a girl who read a book every single day in the summer, and reading was how I really started to understand I could have a different type of career. I grew up in suburban New Jersey with 5 siblings, and we had a really awesome life. But in my mind, it's like, okay, I guess I'll go to law school and be a lawyer. I didn't have any idea that I could have this creative career or be an entrepreneur. And so, it was books for me that really opened up my world. And so I think a lot about that when I'm writing about the girl who's going to read this book, and will it open up her mind to a new experience that she might have, later in her life.
I love that a lot of what you're talking about, you had ideas about maybe what you wanted to do, but you also went back to what you enjoy doing, which I always, share with when I'm speaking on college campuses and high school audiences. I always share that the most important thing is figuring out what you want to do and get up every day and go do those things. And sometimes that's really hard, because I think we hear a lot of noise around us. Sometimes even from parents saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right. And I think that it's something that you're just so inspiring, sort of sharing that you ultimately just went and did what you wanted to do. Right. And maybe you made some kind of missteps along the way, and then you came back. What's one misstep that you made? You seem perfect, Tina. I mean, you went to all these countries, at the UN. I mean, all these, you write best-selling books. I mean, what can't you do? But there has to be one little nugget in there that you were just not that happy about at the time.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend the other day, and I was laughing, and I was like, boy, was I a little dictator of a boss in my 20s, right? I was just laughing, and I'm like, I really did grow up with my company. And so I was managing things I never experienced before in my life. I'll tell you this funny story. I once had someone who was working for me, and their grandfather passed away, and then their grandfather passed away again. And then we discovered rather, this person was just blatantly telling many lies. And I didn't really understand, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with people not being truthful at work? How do you deal with workplace issues? Because I was such an entrepreneur that I just wanted to do my own thing and work and be in my bubble. And again, introverted, I didn't really sign up to be the boss. And I never got a lot of fulfillment from, tons of people reporting to me. That just wasn't my thing. And now I look at my team, and I so enjoy every single person that I work with, and they, their performance is unbelievable. But what I realized just recently was how important it is to make sure that the people that are working with you are in roles that they love, and I think so often in marketing, you find people who are willing to be an assistant so that they can then move on, right? Not that their love or passion is, in this area. And now, again, it goes back to, building teams online. I get to work with people who absolutely love what they're doing, and it just makes what they're creating 10 times better, And so whether it's an illustrator or whether it's, the editor, the copy editor, everybody approaches their work with such joy. And I didn't really have that for a big part of my marketing career. And it was the toughest thing to manage, and I think, my next book might be a guide for recovering marketing executives or something, because there's a lot in our industry that, we need to get right. There's a lot, work-life harmony, it's just working 20 hours a day for clients. It isn't the way to survive. And so, what we were tasked to do as an agency for clients kind of created stress for people that they didn't deserve, and people not being in positions they love, created stress. And so I realize now that there's so much stress in that business that just didn't need to be there. And when I decided to close my agency, people were super shocked, but I was at the point where it was like, well, I don't want to sell it because I don't want to go do this for 5 more years of my life. I just don't have that anymore. I don't want to grow this to a 400-person agency. I don't want, a 355 more problems. Like there was nothing more. And so I think that was my biggest difficulty, really. And it was so private and few people knew. It's just how introverted I was, how much I wanted to be dedicated to doing a certain thing, and how you really don't get to do that when you're running an agency. Your job as a CEO is not to be the chief creative officer. That wasn't the job that I had. It was the job I would have loved to have, but at the end of the day, it wasn't. It was meeting with lawyers and reviewing HR policies and doing all the things that I didn't love to do. And so, that was really, really tough for me. It was tough because every experience was so brutal, because I just had a way that I thought things should happen as a person who never spent a day working for another person. So you have to understand, I had a telemarketing job at 16. But besides that, I didn't know what a company culture should be because I hadn't been in one, which also was really great because I would elevate young people, and, diversity, inclusion, belonging was always the philosophy of my firm. So there were a lot of great things, but on the downside, I just didn't know how to manage for situations that came up, because in my mind, I was in this utopia, and that was just not the real world,
Yeah. And I think it's also probably you had a lot of young people where this was their first job too. So they didn't know either. I mean, that's right. I mean, but you learned a lot about culture. I learned through my journey as well. I've learned a ton about culture, and some were not my favorite, but I actually, really am grateful because I learned about what I didn't want to have when I ultimately went and started my own company. So I hear a lot of similarities in that, but I think there's something else that you touched on too that is really fascinating that I think a lot of people don't think about, which I didn't think about it until a couple of years ago when I had been at America Online prior to launching my company Hint, and was there for 7 years and ran e-commerce and shopping. There's a couple of hundred people working under me. And because I was really good initially at working with all of these e-commerce partners and figuring out ways to actually launch them, this was even during the dial-up days. And that whole time I became a manager, and then I was a vice president, and all of a sudden I'm signing off. I'm meeting with legal teams. I'm just signing check box. And I was so bored. I couldn't even stand it. I was like, and then when you get bored, what happens is you start to get grumpy and you get angry. And so I had gotten to a point in my career where I was able to easily leave. It was $1 billion in revenue to AOL. I had 3 young kids under the age of 4 living in my house in San Francisco that I somehow conceived, but I never saw. And I thought, I'm going home to San Francisco. I'm going to go find a job in Silicon Valley and go do something there. But the real nugget that I hadn't kind of appreciated until I actually got off the train and saw this idea that I had that was solving a problem that I had around health was water and beverage. And I knew nothing about it. And I would sit there and hang out in the Whole Foods store that had just opened in San Francisco. And I'd say, so how do I get a product on the shelf? How do I get distribution? And they'd say, if you got to go and work for Coca-Cola for a few years. And I'm like, why do you have to do that? I mean, how hard is it? I was just asking questions along the way. And anyway, but the net of it is that by not actually having the experience, which is kind of where you were when you were 16. You didn't know what you were doing. You didn't know what was wrong. You didn't know what the rules were, but you were learning. And so I think that the biggest problem we have for so many people, and it's kind of what you talked about, even being the head of your firm, you're not able to kind of be learning. You're teaching, right? You're managing, and it's really frustrating. And I think so many people think, oh, I'll go join some boards. That'll solve everything, right? I'm like, the people who want to hire you for boards want to do it because you're good at this. You're just going to be teaching more, and right?
Because yes, I went on a board and boy, did I have to teach a lot. So.
Right? And there's nothing wrong with mentoring and managing and teaching, but if you're doing it every single day when, you miss the creating and the learning, and learning doesn't necessarily mean going back to school either. Learning just means going and putting yourself into uncomfortable positions, moving to Brazil, right? And learning around you. So anyway, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Chasing youth culture and getting it right is also one of your great, great marketing handbooks. And we didn't get a chance to really talk about that, but I highly recommend it to people. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from that book for people?
I'll tell you my biggest takeaway when I was writing it. I had this idea that teenagers were so addicted to technology. And what I actually discovered writing that book was that those of us who were not digitally native were actually the tech addicts. But it was just a tool in the toolbox. That their relationship to it, because for us, it was like, oh my gosh, now I have email. And I liken it to, a woman in yoga class who's still just typing the last message on her BlackBerry, and I think of my youngest brother who's 9 years younger. He can text without even looking, but he knows how to be completely present with his friends. And then he knows when he needs to pick up tech. And I don't know, I just had this idea that like, oh, these teenagers don't know. And I'm like, it's nothing new for them. It's like I had TV my whole life, right? So I know when I'm watching my shows, when I'm not watching my shows, it was not this big invention of our time. And so, I often think that younger generations in general get such a bad rap for things. And I think it's a lot of projection that we are putting onto the different generations. Like, for example, I remember, so my book was very focused on millennials. And I was meeting with a client once from a Fortune 500 company. And she said, oh, these millennials are so entitled. And I said, do you have children? Yes. She happened to have a millennial. I said, so your child is somebody else's entitled employee. Think about that. Where are they learning this? If they're entitled, who's taught them to be entitled? And, I would say in my research on millennials, what I found was, and you hinted at this earlier, wow, this generation, they were promised some stuff they didn't get, right? They were sold like a very bad bag of goods and then had to fix it instantly. And because of them, of their anti-establishment thoughts, we got Uber. And we got Airbnb, like all of these breakthrough companies that came because they had to fix it themselves and they had to fix it really fast, and we saw the gig economy, but it was just the idea of how quick it all came to be. And now when you look at Gen Z, Gen Z will be the most educated generation in history. Also, only 6% of Gen Z is not born in the U.S. And so, they as a generation actually believe government is important, versus millennials who believe government was something that they had to overcome. This generation believes, government actually has responsibility to people and we should go in and fix it, and so they're educated, they know how to fix it. And they're also going to be, the wealthiest generation because they were able to look at the financial crisis and these issues and say, this is not going to happen to me. I don't need to buy a really big house. I don't need to buy a really big car. I actually don't need to buy a car. Maybe I could just share a car with someone. And so, money is important to them, but so is their creative endeavors. And so it's fascinating for me. I still dabble in my, like market research days of looking at generations and creating for them. But when I started to learn more about Gen Z, I was like, oh, okay, so they're kind of like teenagers in the 90s who I thought were pretty cool kids too. And so, very cool, but also with all these tech tools to support them, as they move forward.
I think it's so true. If you ever want to come and hang out with my four, because they're Gen Zers, but they're four different ones. And there's like so many aspects, but I will say that the one consistent thread that I see in these kids, and really for very, very different aspects, is that they are incredibly hard workers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there's like, I mean, when I hear that, oh, these kids are slackers, I'm like looking around the room because they are really hard workers and maybe at times too hard. They, have a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
That would be my one wish, that we can start to take some of that away and try and figure out what is important, because there are a lot of stresses around. I totally agree with you. I grew up with TV. I grew up with Donkey Kong and so many other ones that were out there. And I was pretty damn good at Pac-Man and all those things. But I mean, these kids trying to figure out what is important and what isn't important. And there's points where, I watch them just totally sign off on gaming and and I've got one gamer, the other three couldn't care less about it. Anyway, I just think it's interesting because it's not a cookie cutter generation either. They're just all very, very different, but I think there's great aspects about them that, and like you said, they've seen the financial crisis and seen many of their parents. They've now seen a pandemic. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting, very thoughtful, very educated group about what's going on in the world and wanting to embrace and knowing that we can't actually be a society if we don't all try and figure out how to work with each other, I think is kind of a key thing that I see from them. So, well, Tina, I absolutely love everything about you. And where can people find your books? You mentioned the Target relationship. We love Target. Go pick up a bottle of Hint as well as the all of Tina's great books there. Super great. And where else can people find you?
TinaWells.com. So every week I share a blog. I'm working on a course right now to help people start and launch businesses. And so, yeah, TinaWells.com.
I love it. Well, great. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and give Tina 5 stars, and definitely share this interview as well, and let everybody know we're here every Monday and Wednesday interviewing great people like Tina and other entrepreneurs and wonderful people, and have a wonderful week. Thanks everyone.